I saw one of her paintings and thought it was really beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen paintings that have this abandoned, almost kind of biblical, like epic movement, and within that, this incredible stillness. And I just thought that would be a fascinating thing to work with in dance.
Although we work in such different mediums, we have very shared interests in our different fields that were quite parallel, I think. We had some studio visits and just fell in love very quickly.
My approach on this ballet was actually to go to Kylie first and say, okay, this is the piece of music that I'm sort of thinking about. What I'd love to do is have you paint something, perhaps in response to that, and then actually base the ballet around your paintings. And I'd never worked that way before.
We were focused thoroughly on the music. Verklärte Nacht, which is basically transfigured night. So this was a sextet that was designed by Schoenberg, who was inspired by this really old, really strange poem by Richard Demel. I mean, that was basically this seed that we both trusted. And I think every great dance and art fusion, there is a real part of it where you have to just trust that there are artistic ties that will braid you back together. And at some point you just have to go and create and then come back and shake it up and see what remains and see how that's fruitful for one another. Working on the project while being pregnant has been a really interesting process because I get to be both creating internally and externally at the same time. The process of pregnancy is it's like a supernova or like northern lights or these things that we cannot explain. It's really alien, it's really obscure, it's really odd, and we're supposed to talk about it like it's very natural and easy, but it's like the creative process, I think.
We both work very spontaneously. With her, it's about building the layers of paint on the canvas and forming the figures, the movement over the top of those colors. Similarly, I like to get in the room with the dancers. I'm not really much for developing the material on myself. This ballet is really kind of developing as Kylie's paintings are now being sort of translated into backdrops. I'm now building the dance that will go in front of those paintings.
I mean, the scale it feels like it's coming home, to be honest. That's a big part of, I think, being born and raised in Alaska, is that everything that I'm used to is completely unrelated to a New York sense of scale. I'm used to mountains and trees and whales and everything being so humongous. As a painter, literally walking your way through a perspective, that's something that these paintings give you the impression that you're moving back in space, but the perspective also pops forwards. And that, I think, is related to growing up on boats and always kind of like your perspective always shifting and wiggling and trying to get basically your sea legs in the paintings and understand the impression of driving past something very quickly, but also locking yourself into these little moments. So with the contrast and the texture, for them to go from 6 to 10 feet to 60 feet wide feels like exactly where they ought to go.
The general process is that we will get a paint elevation. We then take her elevation and we have to blow up a map to large scale. In the case with Kylie, is we had to work really closely with her to get colors correct. We went through a Pantone book the first time to pick out different colors that accurately represented certain areas. She said from the very beginning it's more important to have the feeling of it as opposed to every little detail in the exact space. That was huge because when you're trying to make something tiny, very large, you could easily get lost in, well, I need to have this tiny little brushstroke dribble out here, and you're gonna lose the flow and the movement of it at that point. And I think that just her knowing to say that up front was the biggest thing that helped in giving everybody the freedom to move through it and get that feeling.
Trying to recreate a painter's hand is very, very complicated. And I am really grateful to Susan and everyone on the team. They got a really good sense of capturing the spirit of something rather than just recreating or mapping, because a lot of this has to do with the pace at which something is put down and the energy of it. And they really knocked that out of the park. Yeah.
It's in the coming together of Kylie's painting, the beautiful, incredibly lyrical, but sort of almost dangerously lyrical music of Schoenberg and my choreography. Those are rich ingredients. I think whatever we end up with will be visually sumptuous and sonically absolutely, heavenly, because this music is, really truly one of the great pieces written for string orchestra.
It is difficult to give a very clear narrative because I so want the viewers to be able to put themselves in. I think they will be surprised by how full and emotional and heavy it is, but also how many different stories each viewer pulls from it.